what do we mean by democratization and decentralization of the pulpit? Arguably, in our parents' generation, there was broadly a single narrative that was provided from the pulpits. When our parents were listening to majalis, especially from our community, it was primarily from the Indo-Pak subcontinent scholars, and they were listening to lectures primarily about the fada'il of Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam and about tabarra of the a'da of Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam, and of course the importance and the role of aza in one's life. Much of the discussion was rooted around aqaidi issues and the reinforcement of it, and much of it was also about ahkam shar'iyya and how to be able to deal with various masail of ibadat. If you take a step back and start thinking about the breadth of majalis that are presented today, the window has shifted to much more contemporary discussions. It is not irregular to find the pulpit speaking about matters to do with politics, or economics, international affairs, divorce, family issues, local issues. And so it is obvious to say that the pulpit, its content has shifted over the last 3 generations. The question comes, when that democratization and that decentralization of knowledge took place, when that shifting of content took place, were we consciously prepared to understand the consequences of those shifts? When we say the democratization, what we mean by that is that now everybody has a say when it comes to the matters on the pulpit. For example, we now have social media, and everyone with an account has the opportunity to put forward an opinion about any particular matter. Right now on the internet today, you might know that there is something which is known as Shia Twitter. Have you come across this term? There's, for example, Muslim Twitter, Shia Twitter, Pakistani Twitter, Khoja Twitter. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. What we mean by this term is that then when there's a group of people who share the same identity speaking across one platform, you can generally see the way in which those individuals are interacting with each other. Shia Twitter, meaning those people who are on the platform of Twitter and they are Shia by identity, they are speaking about a series of discussions. And you can actually search it, you can see how the conversation is developing, who leads it, where it goes in different directions. You can imagine in the month of Muharram, in Shia Twitter, there are always certain questions that come up. The issue of tatbir, for example. Every year it comes up, the same arguments for, the same arguments against, the same people back and forth with each other because they don't have anything else to talk about. Or for example, in Shia Twitter, you might have quite often the discussion about Sayyid and non-Sayyid marriages. Lots of people are very fiery about this. And so for them it is the most important thing. This is always a conversation inside Shia Twitter. Today, as an example, one of the big discussions on Shia Twitter was about the affordability of ziyarah and who gets called and doesn't get called. And why is it sometimes people with all the opportunity in the world don't get to go, and those people with very little, at the last minute, they find themselves walking to Karbala. And this was the discussion today and went in many different directions. The fact of the matter is everybody has an opinion. This is the democratization of knowledge, where everybody gets a say, irrespective of whether the opinion is right or wrong. We also have the issue of the decentralization of knowledge, meaning that knowledge is no longer coming from one particular source. You can imagine that during our parents' time, there tended to be 1 or maybe 2 maraji' at-taqleed who were being followed by our community members. Normally, for example, there was one, and then when he passed away, it was inherited and another person took over. And then later on, we saw a movement where you had at one time, for example, His Eminence Ayatollah Sayyid Abul Qasim al-Khou'i, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, and at the same time His Eminence al-Imam al-Rahil, Ayatollah Sayyid Khomeini, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. Whereas today, there are at least 30 grand maraja al-kiram, 30 grand maraja that you can do taqleed of, that are well known, well established, to be generally considered to be on par with each other in knowledge. 30. So our community went from 1 to 2, from 2 to 5. 5, the availability of 30. Decentralization of knowledge. And underneath them, we have literally thousands of mujtahideen putting out their ijtihadat, be it in Beirut, be it in Najaf, be it in Qom, be it in Mashhad, be it in Karbala, and many other places. So there is a democratization and there is a decentralization of knowledge.